All right, guys, we are live again on YouTube for Beyond the Big Screen, and it's Beyond the Big Screen Fright Night. So thank you everybody who's out there or who might be out there. Let's just quickly get everything set up for our live streaming of our Halloween series. Now, thanks for joining Mustache Chris and I once again on Beyond the Big Screen as we continue our three-part series getting ready for Halloween, which is coming shortly. Uh, we're going to be looking at some horror and Halloween movies. Today, we're going to take a chomp out of the 2011 vampire classic Fright Night. The 2011 version of Fright Night is a remake of the 1985 cult classic original. The 2011 version takes some of the satirical elements of the original, but with the pre-COVID 2000s twist. This movie has more going on than it appears at first glance.
Yeah, I'm interested why you picked this movie because you've mentioned to me you're not a really big fan of the horror genre, and I lay my cards on the table. I used to be a pretty big horror kind of junkie myself. I still enjoy a lot of horror films. I'm not into it as much as I used to be, so I don't know. Why did you pick this movie?
I think this movie is, I saw it at probably pretty close to when it came out. And there was a couple of things that really grabbed me. I think it really grabbed that 2011 vibe where there was a recession going on. I don't know if it was a full-blown recession or not, but it was economic times weren't really great. And I remember being in that situation of the housing market was lousy and uh just the malaise kind of the early 20 teens. And I wonder if that'll become a historical thing, or maybe it'll be completely washed over by what happened 9, 10 years later. But I also, the acting in this for really just a throwaway movie in a lot of ways. I think it was acted superbly with Anton Yelchin and Colin Farrell, not Amy Poots, Imogen Poots, and Tony Collette. For a movie that's a borderline young adult, teenagerish horror movie to be so superbly acted, it was just such a surprise. And it's a movie I come back to. I've probably watched it 5 or 6 times. I'll just, hey, let's watch Fright Nights, and it's just a really fun movie to watch.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I remember when this came out, and this was like right in the middle of, I don't know if people remember the vampire craze. So like this is when like Twilight was out, and there was that, oh, it was that terrible show. What was it called? True Blood. I don't know. A
Oh
lot of
yeah.
people liked it, and I think there was another TV show, and there was like a bunch of other movies, and it was, I don't know, like the vampires weren't very menacing, and they were like, I mean, in Twilight, don't they like glitter or something when they go into sunlight or something?
Yeah.
Like just not scary at all. And I mean, I think they saw an opportunity to kind of cash in. It's like, although everyone's like watching vampires, but they did try to make the vampires menacing again, which is something that was, I believe, was missing at the time.
Yeah, I think that that's what it really gets down to, is that it hits these major themes that it really, this, I think that this movie on the first face of it has no real business hitting the isolation of modernity, faith and belief, cynicism. There's just so many things that it hits. And I think that what it's surprising is that it just comes out of nowhere, that it takes the horror genre seriously, and it is a real social commentary. I think maybe people will think I'm a lunatic for for thinking this, but I think that of so many movies that have come out, and especially in that vampire era like you talked about, to get a movie that a takes horror seriously and then goes deeper into social issues, I think that it just knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, I was surprised too. I do remember watching it when it first came out, and then I don't know, I just never got around to watching it again. But I do remember enjoying it a lot because I was a big fan of Colin Farrell, and I always enjoyed his acting. I think this was I think he had a string of like kind of flops, and this is when he was going through some kind of personal problems, and this was like kind of his first step, like getting back to what he is. Um, yeah, so that's initially what made me watch the movie, and then upon rewatching it for the show, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of themes. Like, I mean, you can enjoy the film just for what it is, but if you want to just scratch a little bit underneath the surface, it's much more enjoyable in my opinion.
I think something that I thought that you would really like about it is the visuals. And they get right to that with the isolation that people feel, the isolation of living in the suburbs. This is in the Las Vegas suburbs. And it's the one, I think it's the very first scene. They zoom in uh at a high angle of this little subdivision that's just in the middle of the desert, and they really set the isolation. And then when they zoom into the town, and it's clearly one of these suburbs, I mean, it's the kind of suburb that I live in. People pull into their garage and they go into their house, and when they go to work they pull out of their garage, and you don't know your neighbors. I came from a neighborhood before we moved that everybody knew each other, and you'd walk down the street and you'd say hi and you knew almost everybody in your neighborhood. Where here I have neighbors who live next door that I've said maybe three sentences to. And that was one of the things, that isolation that people feel in modernity. I think that they had grabbed that and just fully showed it in all of its ugliness, really, right off the bat.
Yeah, that opening shot really sets up like they're quite literally living in the middle of the desert. And I mean, from my understanding, this actually did happen in Nevada when the housing craze was going on, and they were building all these like houses in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, just building houses, and then the housing market crashed. And from my understanding, they're having, even to this day, they're still having difficulty getting people to move into these places. Sorry, to move into these places.
Yeah, those are the mom says it. Played Charlie's mom, the lead character played by Anton Yelchin. His mom, played by Tony Collette, she says it, that these houses are made thrown up overnight with, as cheaply as possible. And that's the suburban existence. People, and that was especially from that time, because 2011, we're still in the hangover after the 2008 2009 housing crash, really. I mean, I remember housing developments that had just gotten started that they couldn't finish building. And one of the things that they kept talking about in the movie is how everybody was trying to move out. And Tony Collette was a real estate agent. And that was just the thing that I think, if you were around at that time, it just, even watching it now, I got just sucked right back to that time of just, it was not a good time to be around, especially economically. There was so much depression, and no, it wasn't the Great Depression, but people were not feeling stable at that time. And this movie gets to that, and it gets to that because in the setup to the vampire angle.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just, you mentioned in the notes, like people just moving around and nobody knowing their neighbors. I mean, I believe I touched on this when we did the Coco episode last Halloween. Is it's this weird thing in North America where people just move great distances and everyone's kind of rootless, really. I mean, and we discussed in a little bit more in depth in that episode. There's like economic reasons, there's various reasons why people move, but I mean, nowadays it's expected that you are going to change your job every 5 years. And usually, if you have to change your job, you have to change where you're living. And I mean, really, like for a lot of people, why even bother really to get to know your neighbors or set up, serious roots in a community when you're just going to leave in 5 years? It's just like moving from one hotel to the next, right? Which, I mean, further um, gets to your point that in a lot of ways, this community that in this opening shot shows it's, I mean, yeah, people are kind of like living right beside each other, but they're not really. They're all isolated. They all moved there from somewhere else, and they're all going to be moving again in a couple of years or even a couple of months.
And that's the thing that really sets up to where Jerry the vampire, played by Colin Farrell, a vampire who is living in the shadows in a place like Las Vegas, where a lot of people are working third shift. Weird shifts, people coming and going, that you don't know your neighbors. Somebody like a vampire can thrive in that environment. So
Oh,
you move
oh
into
yeah,
they've set up perfectly the fantastical element of the movie.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, and because you're not really talking to your neighbors and you're just, oh, this is, I don't know, he goes to work and I go to work and his hours are kind of different, I guess. You don't really get to know this person. So he can blend right in with regular people and no one's really going to notice because no one's really talking to each other, right?
I thought one of the things, now that we're talking about Jerry the Vampire, is this movie, what I really liked, and tying back to how you said the vampire craze, it honors vampires in this movie in a way that I mean, let's be honest, in that late 20 aughts and into the 20 teens, that shows or movies like Twilight and the books Twilight, they didn't honor the vampire genre. This really did. It followed the rules to a T.
Yeah, that's what I really enjoyed about the movie. And in terms of the, you can't go into the sunlight and stake through the heart and um superhuman strength. I know I think it was I think in the Twilight movies they kept that part, but yeah, and it also made vampires, I mean, what they are, right? Predators, menacing, soulless monsters, which a lot of those shows that we had mentioned earlier, they just didn't do that at all. It's like either, I don't know, they were like sexy or cool, or they were like, I don't know, like teenage heartthrobs. Like it's just that's not what a vampire is at all. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't understand. Like, do something else then. I don't understand why you're using vampires as like a literary device, or I guess in this film, like a film device. It just, I don't know. It always rubbed me the wrong way. There was one movie that came out around that time that did something different with the vampire genre that I thought was kind of cool. I mean, it's a little tangent, but like maybe one day we'll do that film as 30 Days of Night, where they're like in Alaska and they come out when it's all dark or what have you, and it's like they just roam free for those 30 days because there's no sunlight. I thought that was and then they did something slightly different with the vampire character.
I what I really and I not to harp on the late aughts, early 20 teens vampire. They tried to make vampires in Twilight that they had a heart, so to speak, that they really had a shred of good guy in them. And when a vampire in the trope, and I'm sure at some point, if we're talking about doing a series on vampires and the history of vampires, but really the trope or the literary device of the vampires is that they're really the absolute worst of humanity. If you take the human person and you turn them into a rational beast, really, they're vampires are a rational predator. They're the worst of humanity, and that's what I think that they're supposed to represent. It's not that they're like some good guy that just happens to live forever or whatever. I think they're supposed to represent the very worst of us, boiled down to its absolute essential nature.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it has to thrive off drinking other humans' blood, and I know in some of the movies and books they've said like, oh, they can drink animal blood but it doesn't last very long or what have you. I think that
Yeah.
was Interview with the Vampire. Yeah, but they live off human blood, and I mean they kill people or they change people and bestow upon them this curse of being a vampire. um yeah, like it's supposed to be the absolute worst of humanity, like you pointed out, like boiled, down. It's supposed to be horrific. It's supposed to be something scary. And I know even like early on with like Bram Stoker, there's Dracula is kind of he's appealing in some ways to a particular type of people, a particular type of person, but stripped away, he's a monster, right? And they in that movie and in the book they depict that too.
Yeah, and the vampire character is really, it's appealing, but it's also monstrous. It's both of those in one, which I think in a way is, if you take our rationality and pull away the good, it is, it can be charismatic and monstrous at the same time. I think that
What's
that's the terrifying part of the vampire, is because it's a reflection on us.
what was like Colin Farrell mentioned, he had a difficult time trying to really get into the role because I'm playing a character that has no soul. And I mean, and it really does come across in the movie where even when when we find out pretty quickly that he's a vampire, but he's like interacting with, Charlie's mom and his girlfriend, and even Charlie, and pretending like he's not a vampire. He comes across as, yeah, I can see the appeal of the guy. He's handsome, I guess, and he's muscular and he seems kind of cool, but it seems all artificial. Like there's no warmth, there's no soul behind when he's trying to act like a human.
And I think the one thing with the vampire, with the whole genre, is somebody like Jerry, and that maybe that's how, to me, that maybe that is what the thing that really connected most with me in this movie, is that Colin Farrell, however he pulled that out, he nailed that person who is totally without humanity, but he's still in human form. Well, he's totally devoid of the good of humanity.
Yeah. And he but he plays it in such a way that like I can see how he would fool people, right? I
Oh,
can see why.
absolutely.
I could see how Colin Farrell could go to a bar or something like that and pick up a girl or what have you, or, fool a guy into thinking like, oh, he's a cool guy. He's going to help me do whatever. He's going to help me with my work around the house, or, you know what I mean? But but you could tell, like, just with his facial expressions and the way he acts he's playing a character. It's almost, I guess, the mindset you'd have to get into. I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming Colin Farrell probably studied some psychopaths or serial killers in terms of trying to get into that. Like, how do you play somebody with no soul, um, and like devoid of humanity, yet is still human?
The other thing about vampires, I've gone into a little deep dive into Deuteronomy. We'll go theological for a minute. And so much of the, really the ancient law, and you see like movies like Blade, which I know we'll get to Blade at one time. What the one thing I thought was really cool about Blade is that the vampire was a Sumerian, but those ancient Middle Eastern cultures, the Hebrews, the Sumerians, etc., blood was such a key element, and drinking blood was horrific to the Hebrews. But in others of those cultures, blood was what you sacrificed to the gods, because blood is really life. And to think that these vampires, they're living purely off of the life of others. They're literally sucking the life out of them. And that was another thing that this movie really, I think, captured perfectly. Jerry is sucking the life out of them, the humanity out of them, and he's giving them this artificial humanity when they become vampires.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, even till this day, people still drink blood, right? I know I don't know the African tribes that do it, but I've watched the videos where they puncture the cow's neck or the goat's neck and they're just drinking goblets of blood. I mean, it's very I mean, to our eyes, I mean, for me, I'm like, oh, that's a little much. But, and it's till this day, and I believe it has like religious significance over there.
Now, another aspect of the movie that I think the movie really taps into is the idea of faith and belief, more than just religious faith, because they do touch on that tangentially, but just belief in general of what do we believe, what do we see with our very own eyes, and how does our senses fail us or not give us the information we want. Because even Charlie, he sees what is happening, that clearly there's something seriously wrong with Jerry. And for a good chunk of the movie, he doesn't even believe what his own senses tell us. And I think we see that so often, especially in our modern world, that we're supposed to be so believing in science, but science is really what can we observe. And I think it's a key trait of humanity, that we are very easily fooled into not believing what we observe directly with our own senses.
Well, yeah, I know you use an example like Jerry is a monster that literally lives right next door, right? And his friend Ed is the one he notices it pretty quickly that Jerry's a vampire, and but he's a dork and he comes across as kind of crazy and nobody really wants to associate with him because I know he's not popular and like I pointed out, he seems unhinged. I mean, it's understandable. He's saying his neighbor's a vampire. I think most people would be like, are you sure about that?"
Yeah,
You know what I mean? But if you actually listen to what he was saying, he's like, I have video, I have this, I have this, I have this. I mean, me personally, I'd be like, I'm doubtful of this, but show me what you have, and then I'll see what I think, right? But the thing is, with the majority of people, don't want to even be associated with those people, right? Because it's a social stigma that comes onto them, and they kind of touch on this in the movie where Charlie stops hanging out with Ed because he's trying to get the good looking girl Amy. But at this he Charlie kind of sees Ed as being this like social pariah. It's like, well, if I associate with him, other people are going to judge me based on what this guy's saying and what he's doing, right? But and I'll use the modern example, right? Like just from recent history. I mean, look at Jeffrey Epstein's an example, right? Where he was right around with all these people and the writing was all on the wall. And it's not like nobody had been talking about what was going on with Jeffrey Epstein, right? But the difference is now you can talk about it openly, but not that long ago, you were considered a crazy person, an insane person, really, like a social pariah for bringing this guy up and this island and the whole nine yards. You were, I don't know, like a lunatic. That this is the stuff that like Alex Jones would say, or this is the stuff that So I'm just using him as an example. He was one guy, but he wasn't the only guy by any stretch of the imagination, and everyone just ignored it. Now it's okay to talk about it because it's socially acceptable, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't bring it up at family dinners, but you know what I mean, right? Or um
I
not
would,
too
but
long
I'm
ago,
different.
you no, no, you know what I mean? Like not too long ago, it wasn't you were considered like a crazy person for even talking about this,
Yeah,
and there was
you're a
something wrong with
conspiracy
you.
theorist.
But I mean, in a lot of ways, Ed, he's observing, he's videotaping, he sees Jerry, he knows the truth, and everyone's just ignoring him because to even entertain that idea causes like a social anxiety in people because it's like, oh my god, like what if somebody hears me say this, or what, you know what I mean? And it also, people don't want to accept it because for different reasons, like it causes a social anxiety. Nobody wants to think that like somebody like Jeffrey Epstein is like a real person, right? Because it leads to all other kinds of problems of like questioning like what else is going on, and that leads you down. I get it, right? Because it's an uncomfortable feeling. It's the same thing with Jerry. Ed's going around and telling everybody that Jerry's a vampire. I mean, who really wants to even believe that's the case?
I go back to, I always think of this experiment that they've done where everybody will be in on it except for one person, and they'll be sitting in a big conference room with people, and they'll pull the fire alarm, and all the people in on it won't get up. But the person who doesn't know that it's a fake fire alarm, if they don't see everybody else leaving, they stay put. And it happens, it's like 9 times out of 10. The person who doesn't know, because they see that nobody else is going, so they stay put too. And we see that in situations where the madness of crowds, where either everybody will go nuts or everybody will just freeze up, and nobody wants to be the one who goes outside of the pack.
Yeah.
It really is. It's a fundamental nature of humanity that we don't we want to say that we're scientific and that we follow the science, but how many times do we see observe something with our senses and we ignore all the conclusions that really are that naturally come from our direct observations of a situation, because it either doesn't fit into what we know, or it could get us in get us not out, it turns us into outcasts amongst the tribe, so to speak. I mean, Nassim Taleb writes about this all the time in books like the Black Swan, where people don't see the highly improbable come because it doesn't follow into what they expect to come.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, I would say that this is, I mean, for the most, I would say it's a relatively healthy human instinct to, band together and follow kind of what the group is doing, but it can get to a point where it is unhealthy, where there's something that's very blatantly obvious is not right, and yet we're just kind of going along with it because everybody else is going along with it, and to do otherwise, it will either create social anxiety in the individual or, become honestly like a social outcast. You might get fired at your job if you speak too loudly. You might, have family members turn on you. I mean, that's not healthy at all.
It is, in a way. It's even if you look at it, and if you contrast what you were saying earlier about people moving and they don't have the same social network that they used to, I get the real social network of people who they live with their family and their neighbors, but we still have that baked into us evolutionarily, that we don't want to fall outside of the group. And it was a evolutionary way to survival tactic, but it is so hard wired into us to not want to be outside of the group.
I would argue that it's even worse now because of the isolation, because you don't have a larger group to confide in terms of, I don't know, observations that you've made or beliefs that you have or different ideas, um, that you can trust. Now it's, I would say, because of the social isolation a lot of people are feeling, it's even more powerful to try to fit in even more. I know that seems kind of oxymoronic, but it not really, because if you start, going off the handle and saying stuff like Ed or doing, you know, talk about any particular issue. I mean, it seems like any issue you talk about, you end up getting in trouble nowadays. But um, you're not gonna you're gonna feel even more pressure to fit in because you don't really have anybody that you can trust. I mean, honestly, trust uh, to express maybe different views to.
Another really important scene, so that they really they obey the rules of the vampire, and I think they really tapped into this whole idea of faith. Is Charlie pulls out a cross and he holds it up to Jerry, and Jerry like goes back like it's affected him, but then he just runs up and Charlie and he grabs the cross and he starts it on fire and he says, "Do you believe?" And he says it only works if you believe. And so you have the obvious, the religious message to it, but people are using things, uh using tools almost of things that they believe in, but they really don't believe in it. And I think that that's another thing that the movie tapped in it, is that people just don't fundamentally believe in anything. And it leads into another theme that I saw in this movie of just cynicism that goes through our whole culture, that our fundamental traditions we don't believe in, we don't believe in ourselves, we don't believe in our senses. And it's not cool to believe in any of these things anymore. It's cool to
Well,
not believe in anything.
that's exactly it, right? It's cool to be nihilistic, right? As would be the word for it, right? To have any like, why would you believe in anything? I mean, in turn, I'll use like a political example or what have you. It's like the people who are like, well, I'm not left wing and I'm not right wing and I'm not that, like, I'm a centrist and I don't like, what does that even mean, right? Like, to me, it just, what it's saying to me is you don't really believe in anything. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it's saying to me. You don't have any beliefs. But that's a cool thing. Like, I mean, if you talk to regular people or just scroll through your social media, that seems to be like the general case. It's like, well, like, it's cool to be cynical about everything. It's cool to be not believe in anything. It's cool to yeah, it's cool to, I don't know, not be passionate about anything, which is, it's so bizarre to me.
Yeah, it's this whole idea of, I hate the left, I hate the right, so I'm just gonna pick and choose to be in the middle. It's saying that you've really not given these ideas a thought, because maybe the left really is right, and if the right is really wrong, or vice versa. Then you've just picked the middle ground of, and you're not right in any, you're not correct in any of your thinking. It's not a thought out argument. It's just saying I'm going to be in the middle. that
Yeah,
doesn't that doesn't necessarily mean you're right. You're
no,
correct.
it's just neat. I don't know. And for the most part, it's just an
It
easy
probably
way
doesn't
out,
mean you're
right?
right in a lot of ways.
No, it doesn't. And even with particular stuff like belief and passion, it doesn't even necessarily have to be. I mean, the left could be right in one way, and the right could be right in one way, and you just go like, "Oh, well, I'm in the center." Okay, to me, it just shows that you haven't really thought about the issue because you would probably lean in one direction or the other. It's. I mean, I guess we're going on politics now, but I mean, centrism is just, it's a lack of belief about anything, really.
It probably gets back to a nihilism, as in a way of, I don't like to listen to the arguments, and I don't want to listen to the debate, so I'm just going to really check out, and I'm going to be the middle of the road,
Well, yeah, that's what it is,
without really
right? And I mean,
evaluating any of the information at hand.
when it, and and I've talked about this before on different shows we have. There's like core beliefs that you can't be in the center about, right? I mean, we're not gonna use examples, but maybe down the road, if we do like something like political movies or what have you, we can maybe use some examples. But there's like core beliefs that you can't be in center of the road. Like when Jerry brings up like you have to believe, you can't like, well, I'm a centrist when it comes to believing in Christ. It's either you do or you don't. There's no center route, right? And obviously Charlie, I don't know, maybe later in life he does, but at that point he doesn't. So the cross is meaningless because he doesn't, his belief doesn't bestow it any power. That's kind of how I interpreted the scene. Like if you had like a saint or maybe like somebody like Martin Luther, right? You might disagree with him or not, but I'm sure if he held the cross, you know what I mean? Like it would have some effect on Jerry, because he's bestowing he actually believes in this symbol and he's bestowing it with some power, right? And I guess in the way that they're doing it in this universe, I know in some vampire movies, it's just like the cross shows up and it's like, oh, I can't do anything with it. In this movie, I guess it requires that you have legitimate belief about Christ and Christianity.
which I
Yeah,
think
it's
is
just,
the which I
yeah,
think
sorry.
is the point of the movie, that you have to believe in something. You you
Yeah.
can't be you can't be just wishy-washy through life. You have to make a stand. And I think that is really the essence of the movie. I mean, think about it, where Charlie stands. What's the middle ground between the people who don't believe in vampires, who think it's insane, and the fact that Jerry exists? One of them is the truth. One
Well,
of
I mean,
them
I
is validity, that vampires in Charlie's world exist, and there's no middle ground. You can't pick, oh well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. No, Charlie knows that vampires exist. I think that that's what it, to me at least, that's what the movie really stands for, is that uh you have to pick you have to pick a ground and stand on it, and you can't be wishy-washy about it. You can't be fair and balanced. You have to pick it and believe in it. And that's what it goes back. One of the major characters of Peter Vincent, he's the Las Vegas magician who does a vampire magic show. He's lost all of his faith, even though he's seen vampires in real life, and his parents were killed by vampires, and he's lost the faith in what his own senses have told him.
yeah, and I also kind of interpret his character that it was, um he's like he'll dip his toes into it, but like because of what happened to him, it was so horrific that like actually really getting near a vampire again, it's debilitating to him. So he puts on this facade where, I mean, one of the funnier scenes in the movie, he like pulls off his black wig and takes off his fake mustache and stuff like that because he's like the Peter Vincent character that he plays on the show is kind of like a shield from, I mean, who he really is and what really happened to him. That's how I kind of interpreted his character.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. The way I thought about him, it was that maybe that is the case, that he just couldn't deal with the reality of what he knew, and so he was just going to cash in on it. But
Yeah.
I think deep down, he wanted to do something, and he does pull that out at the end. But it took a lot to get him
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah,
Again, with
he
this, to pull him into believing in something.
or believe or accepting what he's seen with his own eyes, open your eyes, like like Stanley Kubrick reference, right? A lot of people walk through lives with their eyes wide shut, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, Peter Vincent, he's purposely closing his eyes to what he knows is the truth, though, right? And I can kind of get it, like because the truth is so horrific, he's shielding himself from it. But at some point, you have to face the truth.
This is probably a good time to start getting into what we really liked about this movie and why it's a Halloween classic. And for me, it took the genre of horror and vampire movies seriously, but it was satirical too. It was fun. It wasn't dark completely. It was light, and it took the genre seriously, but it didn't take it too seriously over the top. And I think it caught the vibe of a time and a place, It was also a movie that really not the whole family, but a good chunk of the family, your teens and all into adults could really sit down and enjoy this movie and get something out of it. And I think that that's really why it turned into a Halloween classic for me, at least.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a fun thrill ride. It reminds me, we were talking about it earlier. Steven Spielberg had a little bit to do with this film. It has a very kind of Steven Spielberg kind of fun Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of feel to it, but within the horror genre. Um, and like, yeah, I would say like a young teenager who's kind of like, I don't know, maybe they like horror, they kind of like more gothic-y, dark stuff. I mean, you can show them this movie, it'd be fine. I wouldn't show anybody younger than that because there is blood and gore and it is scary.
There's the Spielberg. He had worked on a couple of scenes in particular, and one scene that I think it's for my money too, it's probably the best scene in the whole movie, is Charlie's friend Ed corners Jerry, and they chase each other, and Ed goes into the pool, and Jerry just slowly descends into the pool, and Ed's holding up his cross. It doesn't affect Jerry at all. And then Jerry just slowly talks Ed into really consenting into becoming a vampire. Then he
Yeah.
bites him, and they switch to a scene below from the pool, so the camera is underneath what's going on, and it just shows the cross falling out of Ed's hand and descending into the depths. And I think that that was such a powerful scene. I mean, it's one of the most powerful, visually powerful scenes I think I've seen in any movie. It's deep. It's emotional. I mean, I couldn't see how somebody couldn't see that one scene and say that this movie is worth watching.
Yeah, as soon as you mentioned Spielberg had something to do with that scene, when I rewatched the movie, it's like I saw it right away. It's like, yeah, that's a Spielberg thing.
Now, what would you say, Chris? You can maybe tell us what are some things you didn't like about this movie?
Oh, didn't like. I would have liked if they had. It almost seems like they cut time out of this movie in the sense that like Ed's relationship and Charlie's relationship is just kind of it feels a little rushed. Like I would have liked if they had fleshed out that relationship a little bit more because it's like you get it for I don't know, like 15 minutes or what have you, and then Ed gets turned and then he's kind of out of the movie for like an hour and shows up again later. It just I don't know. I felt like the movie suffered a little bit. I would have liked to have had their relationship, I don't know, fleshed out more.
I can't say that there's a ton that I really didn't like about the movie, but I think some of the things, I think the teen romance stuff was just a little bit too much for my tastes. I mean, maybe that's probably the thing that kept the teens watching was the romance angle and the high school stuff. And I think some of the Peter Vincent, the shtick got a little old, that we got the point that he was a charlatan and a fraud, but they just kept beating a dead horse, and I thought that they could have moved on a little bit more from that, and they got
I
the point across.
Well, it's weird because they mentioned that this is one thing maybe I would have changed the move. They mentioned that Jerry's the one that killed his parents. That to me, I should have been the opening shot. But we get the shot that his friend Adam, his parents and him are getting killed. Charlie and Ed's friend from by Jerry. I would have had the opening shot be Vince's parents.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good,
right,
that's a really good idea.
because Adam's not really all that important to the movie, and it doesn't. I mean, he's just on screen for a couple of seconds, and that's it. And wouldn't really have changed Ed's story all that much. And it would have, I don't know, would have made Vincent's character. It would have made him a little bit more important, added a little bit more depth because it's just kind of like a throwaway line. It's like, wait, what? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's what I would have done at the beginning of the movie.
I think not showing Adams and his parents getting killed would have cast more doubt too
Yeah,
on the whole story. Like, how can you really believe what's going on if you haven't seen? Once you see Adam's parents and Adam getting killed, then you know it's vampires. There's no
yeah,
doubt there once that happens. I would have liked to have seen a lot more backstory on Jerry, and I think they could have built that in. I think that would have been it maybe would have turned it into a different movie. Maybe that was what made it sort of mysterious, is that we don't know anything about Jerry and his background, or we just know that he's always been there. But it
yeah.
would have been cool to find out who Jerry was.
Yeah, and they could have maybe just thrown a couple, I don't know, he mentioned something. It's like, oh, I remember, I don't know how old they say he's in the movie. It's like, oh, I remember like living in like the Roman Empire or something. I was in, Caligula's house or something. Do you know what I mean? Right? Because that would be a place like somebody like Jerry would probably hang out. Um, yeah, like little things he could have mentioned, just gave a little hints. But I mean, maybe they purposely thought it would have been better if they just left him mysterious and you're wondering like where did this vampire come from?
I think in a way they had to do that because then you start to become Twilight again. You get back
Yeah.
into that loop of, oh, okay, it's just the standard uh new wave vampire movie, glitter vampire movie, where you keep it completely obscure. And that's really his background story, is that it's obscure.
And it probably they were thinking too, it's like, well, he's a soulless, bloodthirsty monster. What else do you need to know about him? He's not cool. There's nothing cool about him. Like he's not, you know what I'm saying? Like
He's
it's
cool on the surface, he's
he's cool on
incredibly
the
cool,
surface.
yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, well, let's not like add this like entire interesting backstory where like, oh, like Jerry legitimately seems kind of cool. Like, look, he saw the 30 Years War and he was at the American Revolution. It's like, no, he's a bloodthirsty monster. That's what he is. There's nothing more to it than that, like kind of like how people, I don't know, it's weird, like certain serial killers or what have you, like they get so much into like their background story and it's like you almost like kind of lose sight. It's like, yeah, but they're monsters. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah,
Like how much more do we really need to know than that?
yeah, don't contextualize him. Keep him the bloodthirsty monster that he is. I thought that was one of the best speeches, and one of my favorites of all time is where Ed describes Jerry as he's a shark. That he's
Yeah,
he I think it was a line that, oh, did Spielberg do Jaws? That might have been a
yeah, he did Jaws. Yeah,
that might have been a throwback. Ed quotes Quint's speech from Jaws, is that all they do, they're predators that just sharks live, breathe, and eat, and that's all they do. And that's what Jerry
yeah,
does. That's all he does, is live to eat, and that's all.
yeah.
I thought that was
I,
another really great thing that they tied all together. And don't contact Jerry, like you said, Jerry on the surface is really cool, but he's not. He's an evil monster.
yeah,
Don't
and don't
contextualize it. Don't make him look better than he is, because he's not.
or sympathetic in the least, right? Because
Yeah, he's not.
there's nothing to be sympathetic about. I mean, a couple of things I liked in the movie. I really liked Amy and Charlie's relationship. It felt very natural. They felt like a young couple in love. And to me, they really works for the movie because later on in the movie, when Jerry turns Amy and Charlie sees Amy and they like Jerry kisses her and then bites her. It's like a gut punch, right? You know what I mean? Like not only is like Jerry changing her, like he seduced her too and took her away from me. But that was like a thing that that was a thing I enjoyed in the movie where you can kind of tell that like Amy's attracted to Jerry because Jerry is kind
It's
of all the
Colin
things that
Farrell. Yeah.
Charlie, yeah, but he's like Jerry's also kind of all the things that Charlie isn't. Like Jerry's cool, he's muscular, he's strong, he's decisive.
Yeah.
Um,
Confident, all of it.
and Charlie's not any of those things. I mean, in a lot of ways, he's trying to not be the dork, and um, he's the almost the opposite in a lot of ways. I don't know. It almost seems like Amy, she likes Charlie. She says this. She likes him that because he's kind of a dork and he's kind of sensitive or what have you. But you can tell that she wants a little bit of Jerry's decisiveness. And Charlie. I mean, that's how I interpreted the whole thing, and that's why it was like emotionally, like, was like a gut punch. It's she's almost cheating on him, even though she was seduced with Jerry's powers.
Yeah, it puts you in that feeling of when you're a young kid and you see the person that you're interested in, who, even if they're just talking to another person, it gives you that gut punch. They really, that was another thing that they really got across. Just a fantastic movie. So I think I mean, that's really my appeal to people to go and watch this. Is it it will definitely be another movie that rounds out, if you're the type of person who you start getting into October and wants to watch horror movies. I think that this is a quirky, fun one to round out kind of your more serious horror, you might say.
Yeah, and then I'll leave it on with the quote where Jerry can't, because a vampire can't come into your house unless you invite them. So Jerry comes to the conclusion that he's just going to get rid of the house, and he rips up the gas line and he blows up their house. And it's a funny line that he says, like, I don't need an invitation if there's no house, because I mean, it makes sense. I'll just blow the whole house up then. I thought that was one of the better moments in the movie.
Yeah, and I like that, where it really kicked the action up too, and it has a good fun action element to the movie as well. It really was.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's a really rounded, fun movie to watch at the Halloween time.
Yeah, for sure. I recommend it to anybody. I liked it a lot. I mean, in particular, Colin Farrell's performance. He's great. But even the two young leads, um, they had both have really weird names. Like, how do you pronounce that actress's name?
Imogen Poots, and then Anton Yelchin. He actually died not too long after that movie came out. He died in 2016 or 2017 in a real freak accident.
Yeah.
His car had he lived in Hollywood in the hills, and he parked his Jeep, and I guess that model Jeep that he had a problem with the parking brake, and it just freak rolled back and hit him. And
Yeah, and he
he
got
was
pinned to
26 or 29, and he died.
Yeah. Yeah, I read about that when I was watching after watching this movie, and it was, yeah, that's pretty terrible. I remember seeing him, I believe it was in Star Trek he was pretty famous for.
Yeah. He
Um,
also was in another movie maybe that we would talk about sometime, called Odd Thomas, that had a horror element to it. Not horror directly, but it was he was we won't get into it, but it was another movie, and it was setting up to make a series, and he died not long after that movie came out, and the series kind of just died out. But yeah, I think he was a good actor, not the greatest, but I think he would have had a great career ahead of himself.
yeah, these two were Imogen and Anton were in another horror film called The Green Room. I think they were a real couple at one point. If anybody knows, can somebody tell me like her name? Like what is that? Is that like,
She's British. I think it's
yeah? Was
Irish or
that
something, Imogen.
That's what I thought. but I've never seen it. I'm just interested. Like, where does that name come from? I don't know. If anybody knows, just let me know.
All right, so we're going to leave it at that tonight, or with today's episode, and look for a couple more horror movies before we eventually get back into the mafia on the so we're definitely looking forward to. If you have suggestions, if there's movies and topics you'd like to talk about, definitely get in touch with us through the website a2zhistorypage.com, Facebook. We're out there, so definitely let us know, and we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, see you guys. I believe Nightmare on Elm Street's the next one on the docket, right?
Yeah, and then yeah, then we're back into full mafia on the live stream.
Yeah, get ready for Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, that's like my movie, so I think you guys have a blast listening to me just talk about that.
All right, we'll talk to you next time.